Hypocrisy is the defining characteristic of mankind. Look no further than our former US President, Dwight D. Eisenhower, a man who helped subjugate the Iranian democracy, a man who orchestrated the overthrow of republics in Central America. Yet it was also the same person in his 1961 farewell address that left us with a warning of the military-industrial complex, a warning that the profiteers of war industries would conglomerate and set to lead to destruction, both abroad and domestically. And in the United States, that warning has kind of fizzled out, to be quite honest. The United States, I'd say, has a toxic relation to its U.S. military. I'd say it's quite ironic, given that here in the U.S. we often pride ourselves on the morals and values we find in our Constitution. But let me ask you, do you find those values during the colonization of the Philippines? Did you find that spark of liberalism during the bombing of Vietnamese children? Did you find the pursuit of happiness in the plight of the Iraqi and Afghan people? And these events in the past are continuing in the future, with the ongoing Palestinian genocide and our current bombings of fishermen in Venezuela. It is today that we have to be more vigilant about the power of the military-industrial complex, but also in how it ingrains in everyday life and how it hides itself. Today, I want to speak to you all personally about the military-industrial complex, but more specifically on a singular component: the system of military welfare, the system of recruitment incentives used by branches of the U.S. Armed Forces that serve as a detriment to both U.S. domestic policy and foreign policy. In today's age, we are living in a time of crises. Issues that have compounded throughout the decades, combined with the COVID recession, have showcased the weakness of the U.S. economy and the weakness of our society. Yet in that era, we see the continued expenditure of the military, and we see the continued ideals of Cold War era militarism. And we should not only be hell-bent on where our money is going in the fiscal budget, but also on where that military spending is going. So today, I want to speak to you all about recruitment incentives and the role it plays in both our fiscal spending and in terms of how it impacts our U.S. policies. To begin, I'll speak to you about the problems we have in our current fiscal budget and the problems in the U.S. military. Second, I want to speak to you all about what these problems then cause in relation to recruitment incentives. And finally, I want to speak to you all about a potential legislative and personal solution we can take to combating the military-industrial complex. So, let's convene with Congress, draft up some memos, and get straight into the meat of all this. So firstly, let's begin with the problems. Problem number one, fiscal priorities. Now, if you've been paying attention to news during 2025, you'll have heard a lot of stuff. As of current, we're living in a government shutdown in which federal jobs are being lost and government programs are being shut down. We are living in a farming crisis in which states like Iowa, Arkansas, and Nebraska are seeing farmers trounced by rural debt. And we have a housing shortage in which the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has reported over 4.7 million missing homes needed. Now, reported by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was our fiscal spending for this year, which was reported at 6.6 trillion US dollars. Now, in that federal budget, what was the makeup of it? Well, 12% of that budget went to the Department of Defense, and another 5% went towards the Department of Veterans Affairs. In total, 17% of our US budget went solely to military institutions. To put that into perspective, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Education, all combined are less than 10% of the fiscal budget. Now, I could benefit a lot from an increase in spending for the Department of Transport, for the Department of Education, but not in the military. And I'm sure that many of you do not benefit whatsoever in that increase. And in a time of crises, that is more prevalent now than ever. Now this makes us move on to our second point, which is where that military spending is going. So we have roughly $1.1 trillion going towards towards the Department of Defense. Where's that money going? Well, it isn't going on bailouts to foreign governments or going towards maintaining or increasing degrading of military stock arms. Then that money is going towards other countries to export our genocidal tendencies. Look no further than Israel. Did you know that as of this year, we have 751 active military contract sales with Israel, estimated to be over $100 billion. And that number is not going down anytime soon. As the Trump administration reported on September 28th, it reported by Business Insiders, reported that they are looking into another $9 billion in funding to go towards Israel and its Palestinian genocide. Now, how many of you, I want all of you to look at your bank accounts, to look at your college tuitions, to look at your mortgages, and I want you to tell me, do you want more money to Israel, let alone just to send it towards their ongoing Palestinian genocide? I don't see any hands up, so I think that makes this point very clear. Where our military spending is going towards a bad cause, and is going towards something none of us should be proud of. And so, now that I've gone to the problems we currently see in our fiscal budget, I want to go into how these problems manifest in relation to recruitment incentives. Now, the first cause is that our system of our high military spending is creating a system of recruitment and a paradoxical system of recruitment and enslavement by the military. Now, as reported by the New York Times as of mid-July, the U.S. recruitment has actually seen U.S. recruitment by the U.S. Army and the Navy have actually met their goals for the first time in several years, and in a reversal of decline, with recruitment signups being estimated at over 61,000 each in both military branches. But what that article also entails is that the reason for this spike in military recruitment is not out of a sense of patriotism or out of pride in the nation. It's out of debt. It is out of the fact that people are fearful that in today's economy, more unshaky and more unstable than ever, people are worried about the stability at home. And many people see the military as an easy and convenient way to find stability in their lives. Young people today experience a multitude of issues: student debt, rising costs, housing shortages, and beyond so. And in those crises, people are turning to the military for support and system structural integrity. But that should not be something we should be proud of, because what this is instead creating is a system of paradox where it is continually neglecting the current issues we have. People will join the military to pay for college. Military institutions will look at that and be like, we need more funding for the military. And the US budget will continue to increase military spending. And it will ironically result in more neglect for our current Department of Education and beyond. And so I think that should highlight it, about how it is creating a paradoxical system. And now this leads me on to my second point, which is how it creates a class division in US society. So I've outlined these problems with US spending. I've outlined these problems about where our money is going and how it's impacting us. And so it should be clear that most of us should actually be in favor of being against the military and trying to reduce military spending. But the problem is that the military in today's age is so extensive in power, extensive in its influence and recruitment. Many people in the US military have a system of veterans ethos, pride in serving the US Army, and pride in their service, not just in being a part of the US military, but also in benefiting from that system. Take for example, if you were a person serving in the US Armed Forces. You're someone who serves in the military, and you're someone who benefits from the GI Bill, housing assistance, food assistance, salaries, and career opportunities in the US military. If you get confronted about potentially reducing the military budget, you're not going to be incentivized to be in support of that. You're actually going to be incentivized to be against it, because your military recruitment is tied to the military spending. And as such, you see any form of cut to the military as a detriment, not only to you, but the communities you find in the military structure, in the army camps and in veterans communities. So I've outlined these two issues, these two problems of military spending and the culture it creates around it. So how can we look towards potential solutions to these current issues? Let's look towards the legislative issue. Now, as such, military spending is primarily focused in congressional budgeting. And every year, Congress has to pass the yearly congressional budget. You know, we're in a shutdown. So that paints the picture very clear. But when we make a U.S. budget, we have to go through the process of apportionment bills, in which members of Congress will have to convene and actually conduct what the budget is going to be for each year. Now, what you can take as an American citizen is you can contact your constituent, or not your constituent, your representative. In my case, my representative is Doug Lafayette. In this book that is not related to the U.S. Congress, my U.S. representative is in the 1st California District and Doug Lafayette. And what you should all do is contact your representative. Send them an email, write them a letter, talk to them in person, don't stalk them. But tell them about your concerns about the military spending and the military budget. Even if your representative is a hardcore conservative or a coastal liberal or someone who really doesn't care and just is there for a paycheck, you have to make yourself clear in what you want and your expectations. Because if you don't, then they'll never even know in the first place, and you won't even have been trying at all. And so finally, this moves me on to a personal solution. If you're not interested in contacting your congressman, sure. But what steps can you take as individuals in reducing the influence of the military-industrial complex and recruitment incentives? Now, while reducing the military budget is a key part in all of this, what we're also trying to focus on is removing the incentive structures in the U.S. military. People turn to the military for forms of aid to escape poverty, and as such, we should take active measures to try and reduce the necessity of being involved in the military. And this can take the form of many different things. Volunteering for different issues. For example, many people join the U.S. military for housing assistance. And a step you can take is getting involved in different volunteer groups, such as with Habitats for Humanity, that focuses on issues like housing. And so, now that I've gone through both the legislative and personal solution, let's comb right over back into everything and recap all this nice stuff. Today, I spoke to you all about the issue of the military-industrial complex. And I wanted to take you all towards an uncomfortable part that we might not want to confront, which is the system of military welfare, the system of recruitment incentives that drives us into becoming a part of this military-industrial complex. I've spoken to you all today about concerns of the fiscal budget, concerns of where the military spending is going, and how the causes it has in both our lives and how it affects the people around us, and also in potential solutions we can take to combat these issues. And so I want you to think about that last message, about the beginning message, about Dwight D. Eisenhower, about that message he left us, the warning of the military-industrial complex. I want you all to think, regardless of that sincerity or the hypocrisy around it, we should continue to spread that message around and not let it continue to kick the can down the road. Oh, hey, look. Truck.